The root of this entire problem is growth.
The model of economic growth is not sustainable. You can't have anything over 0% growth year on year on year on year without coming to some kind of crisis. So sustainability is essential. You can't keep growing a population on one planet forever and ever. Something's going to go crunch.
The problem with having a growth-based economic system is essentially it's based on the ceaseless demand for new goods, which creates more and more production, which creates more and more consumption. And that consumption is based upon our constant desire for novelty and newness. So we've had debt bubbles emerge, easy credit. Easy credit has led to more consumption. More consumption has led to more production leads to more consumption. The banks lend more money because people are buying more. So we see this virtual cycle of growth between debt, credit, production and consumption. All that leads to is more CO2 and more global warming.
That destructive cycle is driven by a linear consumption system in which resources are inefficiently extracted, wastefully processed, carelessly used and then casually discarded, with waste and pollution all along the line.
The greatest environmental impact is the extraction of the raw material in the first place. So as soon as you start to capture materials that have been about to be discarded and recycle them or reuse them, you're immediately having a huge impact, not just the energy saving there, you're stopping all the impact at the beginning of the process. It's about changing a linear progression into a circular one.
Changing from a linear to a cyclical system requires a complete rethink on the way we do everything. This is how the economists explain it. In the current model, the economy, society and the environment are treated as separate entities. Problems created by the economy which affect society, such as poverty, ill health, deprivation and injustice, as well as those that affect the environment, like pollution, extinctions, water depletion and global warming, are externalized, in other words, not included in any financial calculations. So the economy grows while the other two suffer. They call this the Mickey Mouse model, for obvious reasons. So an increasing number of economists and many governments are now trying to develop a second system. In this, the economy, the environment and society are seen as overlapping. And when they're in balance, then sustainable development can take place. It's also sometimes described as the three-legged stool. The control mechanism here is the market.
We've fueled our economic growth on the back of carbon. We know we can't do that anymore. So the first thing we're trying to do is to count the cost of carbon, to reorientate the investment supertanker. The second thing is we've got to start to count the things that we don't count at the moment. The extent to which we take from the natural world, natural resources, with no thought of the consequence at all.
So costs are applied to the externalities, pollution, waste and so on. And as people don't want to pay the extra, they favour the less wasteful processes. And with luck, the polluters go out of business. Sorted, you might think. But this is still a growth-based, profit-driven system, and there are many activities still outside that safe central zone. Not least poverty, injustice and deprivation, which remain uncontrolled. So the third model takes financial growth out of the equation to create what's known as a steady-state solution. Here the economy is subservient to society, and so the social issues are resolved, and society is subservient to the biosphere, which resolves the environmental issues. The only externality is sunlight. They call this one the target.
Essentially, the way a steady-state economy differs from the high growth economy is that there's much less of a throughput of natural materials. So what we have is a zero waste economy where all the waste produced through different parts of the economic system are put back into that economic system, which reduces the environmental impact on various ecosystems, but it also reduces very basic things like landfill and pollution.
Well, I think it's not only viable, I think it's a necessary option, because I think one has to separate a bit the developed countries and the developing ones. Developing ones have the right to become richer, and for a certain period that probably means following quite traditional growth models, because if you look at the example of China, those things work, at least up to a point. They have a lot of unfortunate consequences too. In the developed countries, I think we can speak of overdevelopment in some areas, so I'm not sure I call it a steady state model, but certainly I think we're looking for a different way of assessing what growth actually is.
We need to measure new things and value different things in our society, not just economic growth. So we need to move away from gross domestic product, GDP, and measure other things that are important to us: well-being, human happiness, sustainable environments, good education, those kinds of things.
If we look at surveys of happiness and life satisfaction, over the past 50 or so years in a country like the UK, what we find is that while average incomes for a person have increased by about a factor of 3, happiness has not increased. So when we do surveys, we ask people, how happy are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Those types of data, we find they haven't increased. And so economic growth is hurting the planet in a way, and it's also not really helping us.
I'm a bit of a revolutionary on these things because I think we're at the outer edge of some of the biggest changes in our history across the world, bigger than the Industrial Revolution, not just another Industrial Revolution. And we're grasping our way to how we're going to deal with all of that. And the debate about growth is only one aspect of a much wider debate about what kind of society do we want, how do we factor in not just climate change but wider sustainability issues.
One of the things we're actually up against is the whole idea of work. We're all obsessed with the world of work, we all do more work, we all produce more things, but one of the things we have to realise, if we're going to create a genuinely humane economy, we actually have to do less. One of the big things that people are trying to push at the moment is the idea of a 21-hour week. If we work 3 days a week, 21 hours, essentially we'd be all much happier, there'd be less unemployment because we could share the work, and we would have a more humane work-life balance.
Less time doing paid work will mean more time for barter-based earning, food growing, sustainable travel, exercise and community activity. If we add to that a tax system which turns unsustainable products into sought-after luxuries rather than trying to ban them altogether, plus a new focus on home working and local employment to reduce commuting, we could see major changes happening quite quickly. It's not going to be easy, but if the experts are right, and we're already past peak oil and into overshoot, then a steady state, low growth, high reward economy has got to be the first priority of the herbal fix.